Blackheath, 1958 to 1959. Dad's posting to Woolwich took us to Blackheath, where I went to school at Christ's College, on the other side of the heath. I was put into the third form, but was confused by the homework and the teacher's distant instructions. My struggle became evident, and I was put down to the second form. This I found too easy, and won the class second prize of an Observer's Book of Birds at the end of term. I remember that the older boys charging through the corridors were quite frightening. I joined the Cubs, which was run by the kindly headmaster, Mr. Crombie, and remember carving a boat out of balsa wood. Mum and Dad bought me an electric boat, which I sailed on Blackheath Pond. I had a friend named Graham, who lived near the railway line at the heath end of Pond Road. He and his sister had some imaginary friends called the Swannies. We used to play in an apple tree house we had built, which looked over a tall fence into a compound in which there were large jars of chemicals. Once we decided to use his baby brother's pram with the child on board as a stagecoach, going round and round the flower bed. It eventually fell over. Unfortunately, the baby was all right, but I was not, understandably, very popular with his mother. Marston Trussell, 1959. Dad was accepted for ordination training, and while he was house hunting in the Lichfield area, I was billeted with Grandpa and Grandma Whiteman. While there, I attended Clipston Primary School and went in each day on the minibus. One of our playground activities involved chasing the girls up to the entrance to their toilets, which they treated as a safe haven. One particular girl that I was taken with at this time was named Julie, who lived in Marston Trussell. The school raised money by organising the children in the collection of rose hips from the hedgerows. These were then sold to Del Rosa, the makers of rosehip syrup, at so much a pound for school funds. The school had a library from which we were encouraged to borrow books every Friday. I remember one week borrowing the story of the fisherman and his wife, or the flounder, which Grandpa Whiteman read to me, and then used it as the basis of his evensong sermon that Sunday. A teenager named Barry used to mow the extensive lawns at the rectory, and some days we would play together building dens in the huge cedar trees. Once when Dad and Elizabeth came to stay, the four of us had a really great game of hide and seek in the stables and outhouses, in which a plan of Barry's to tip a bucket of water over the other two ended up with us getting soaked instead. I remember a lady named Mrs. Hastings, who allowed me to help her collect the eggs that her chickens had laid. In the summer I played in the grounds and picked fruit in the orchard, and in the winter made up Airfix models that my grandfather bought me, and played old 78 records on an electrically converted wind-up record player. Among the records was a box set of 6 records comprising the songs from the 1939 movie Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. There was a long wooden jigsaw puzzle that took up the length of the long dining room table. It was a cutaway picture of an Atlantic cruise liner. Grandpa Whiteman was given responsibility for 2 communities, Marston Trussell and East Farndon. Unfortunately, he was unable to persuade them to work together as a benefice. The reason for this was that they were on opposing sides in the English Civil War. Everything came to a head at the nearby Battle of Naseby, and the fallout affected both villages, never to be forgotten. And so the diocese had to place them into separate benefices. Kings Bromley, 1959 to 1961. For Dad's 2 years of theological training at Lichfield, we rented a house called the Friary in Kings Bromley. On his visits to us, Uncle Len taught me the game of snooker on the large table that came with the house. I attended the village school, whose headmaster was Mr. Bennett. I remember his daughter Susan, of whom he expected great things, and was at times quite unfair to her. The school bully was named Beddoes, who took an instant dislike to me. His favourite punishment was to run my knuckles along the rough brick wall in the playground until they bled. Mr. Bennett was aware of what was going on, and I remember that during a woodwork lesson he was called away. But before he left, he told me that I was not to use the Stanley knife while he was out of the classroom. Beddoes started to taunt me, and then offered the knife to me, blade first. I foolishly took hold of it. He pulled it away, and there was blood everywhere. One day we were playing cricket in the playground. Beddoes hadn't arrived yet, and I was given a chance to bat. As I began, he arrived and demanded that I hand the bat over to him. "Give it to me," he commanded. So I did, right across his shins. He ran into the school crying to tell Mr. Bennett what I had done to him. I am very glad to say that the headmaster told him to get lost. I wasn't always very brave or loyal though. I thoroughly enjoyed visits to my friend Martin's very traditional farmyard with free-range birds and animals. One day I came across Beddoes and some of his sidekicks laying into Martin. I wanted to help him, but hesitated. Then his father arrived, and not wanting to be seen to do nothing, plunged into the fray. Martin's father, came over to break up the fight, and because he had noticed that at first I had done nothing to help his son, said quite rightly that I was a rum lad. Just before he left the parish, the rector of King's Bromley very kindly gave me a box full of Hornby train rails to supplement my clockwork set. One day I ran away from home, after deciding that my mother was being unfair to me. However, I went about 100 yards before turning back. At a party organised for the children of the village, we played Postman's Knock, of which I recall feelings of pleasure as well as embarrassment. Elizabeth and I used to give puppet shows in the bathroom from behind a blanket suspended from the clothes pulley. We also made puppets for the story of the valiant tailor from corks, using twice as many for each giant. We also wrote and performed a play based on an encounter between Oliver Cromwell and Charles I after seeing a television play. Dad was selected from all the college students to lead the Remembrance Day service in Lichfield, and so the three of us set off in Josephine to join him there. Unfortunately, she broke down, and so we missed the service. We took many walks along the Trent and Mersey Canal that ran through King's Bromley. At this time there were still a few commercial barging families operating on the system, but many of the canals were now disused. However, all over the country groups of volunteers were working to reopen the system, and wooden boats for hire were beginning to appear. Thus we began to make plans. The owner of the friary, one Major Stuckey, suddenly came home from a posting abroad and required his home back. All that was available to us was a farm cottage in a poor decorative state. Mice were getting through an old fireplace, and so my mother and a daily help set about blocking it up. Elizabeth thus reported in her school newsletter, "Today Mummy blocked the fireplace with Mrs. Evans." Well, Mrs. Evans proved to be very effective, for no more mice came in that way again. Dad and I dug a grave-size hole in the garden, into which we periodically emptied the contents of the Elson chemical toilet, which was housed in an outside privy. Once the hole was in use, a colony of frogs became quite attached to it. As children, we had fun at this time making secret tunnels through the cabbage fields, and driving our train, comprising bicycles and prams coupled together along the country lanes. Cousins Anita, Adrian and Martin came to stay. Elizabeth and I piled up our toys in a corner and sat in front of them with our arms folded, as they were shown into our bedroom on arrival. However, eventually things loosened up and we had some good fun together. Our long-suffering dog Trixie had to put up with the traps that we designed for her, which were set by tying a bone to a piece of wood that was supporting a door flap that would fall and incarcerate her in the structure. She took it all in good part and was soon released. The son of the owner of the farm across the road was named Simon. Once when he was about to go on holiday in the autumn, he kindly told us that we could pick up 20 conkers from the massive tree that grew in his garden. This made us quite determined. By the time he came back from holiday, we had collected and stored away exactly 1,000 conkers. Each day we collected 2 pints of milk, still warm from the cows, in a metal jug from the Jameses' farm. Then we had to negotiate our way past the farm dog, whose name was Liggs, who Simon claimed had eaten one of our kittens. Elizabeth and I reckoned that Simon had wanted the kitten for himself.